Somewhere in a patch of moss so dry it crumbles under your finger, there's an animal that has stopped living, on purpose, and is waiting, sometimes for years, for a single drop of water to bring it back. That waiting is a real biological state called cryptobiosis, the ability to shut down almost everything that defines being alive and start it all back up later without losing a step. The animal isn't hiding underground, isn't storing fat, and isn't slowing its heartbeat the way a hibernating bear does. It removes the chemistry of life itself and keeps only the physical structure that chemistry needs to come back. Tardigrades do this. So do certain nematodes, certain rotifers, and the dormant embryos of brine shrimp, a scattered handful of tiny creatures that all found the same solution to the same impossible problem. The problem is water. Every working cell runs on it. Proteins fold inside it, membranes hold their shape because of it, DNA gets repaired within it, and the moment it disappears, ordinary biology starts tearing itself apart. Take water away from a human cell for too long and the damage becomes permanent. Salts pile up unevenly, structures buckle, and the chemistry that made the cell alive collapses from the inside out. A tardigrade faces that exact threat on an average afternoon. Most species live inside thin films of water clinging to moss, lichen, or soil, and that film can vanish within a few hours of sunlight. When it does, the tardigrade doesn't run anywhere. It pulls its legs inward, contracts its whole body into a tight little barrel, and turns itself into a compact shape called a ton. The ton looks less like a resting animal and more like a seed, and that resemblance is the whole strategy. In miniature, activity switches off while the machinery needed for future activity stays protected. The transformation looks physical from the outside, but the real story is happening at the molecular level, where the tardigrade starts rebuilding the inside of its own cells for a world without liquid water. Proteins that normally drift through watery cytoplasm become fragile the instant water starts leaving, so tardigrades deploy unusual, highly flexible proteins built specifically to stabilize everything as the cell dries. Instead of letting the contents of the cell collapse into a ruined clump, these molecules lock proteins, membranes, and other delicate parts into a stable internal arrangement that holds its shape. The result looks like preservation from the inside out, done without a single freezer, chemical, or piece of outside equipment, just the animal's own molecular toolkit. Once the ton has fully formed, metabolism drops so far that the internal clock governing hunger, growth, and activity practically stops moving forward. Time keeps passing outside the animal, but almost no chemical reactions are happening inside it, which means almost no damage has the chance to build up during that stretch. That's exactly why cryptobiosis feels so close to death. The organism stays structurally capable of living while showing none of the constant activity we normally use to recognize life. The difference becomes obvious the moment water comes back. The ton starts absorbing moisture, its tissues swell, its legs unfold, and cellular chemistry fires back up almost immediately. Within a short while, the animal is crawling through its microscopic world again, and what looked like a dried-out husk turns back into a fully active creature without rebuilding a single body part from scratch. Tardigrades became famous for a reason that goes far beyond surviving dry moss. The same trick also shields them from extreme cold, intense radiation, crushing low pressure, and even the raw vacuum of space. None of that is a separate superpower. Radiation resistance and vacuum survival ride along for free, both coming straight out of the deep protection the animal already built just to survive drying out. Drying a cell is brutal. It creates enormous structural stress, triggers damaging chemical reactions, and shoves biological molecules into conditions active cells almost never face. Any animal capable of surviving that crisis already has defenses that overlap heavily with the damage caused by radiation and freezing, which is exactly why one adaptation ends up covering several dangers at once. Radiation, for instance, breaks molecular bonds inside DNA and produces reactive fragments that attack cellular structures, wounds that active organisms have to repair fast or lose the fight. Tardigrades pair their protective chemistry with unusually strong DNA repair systems, patching up that damage the moment normal activity resumes. Their reputation as indestructible oversells it a little, because enough heat, enough radiation, enough pressure, or enough prolonged stress will still kill a tardigrade outright. Cryptobiosis buys an enormous range of survivable conditions. It doesn't buy immortality, it buys time, and a much wider window of what survivable actually means. The same trick shows up even more clearly in nematodes, microscopic roundworms found in soil, sediment, plants, animals, and some of the harshest environments Earth has to offer. A nematode depends on water just as heavily as almost any other animal, yet several species survive severe drying out by entering their own version of this suspended state. As dehydration sets in, the worm shifts its metabolism, stockpiles protective compounds, and reorganizes its cellular structures before the last usable water is even gone. That preparation matters, because sudden drying overwhelms the whole process, while slow, gradual drying gives the animal enough time to actually build its molecular defenses. This reveals something important about the process. The worm actively rebuilds itself at the molecular level before normal life becomes impossible, rather than simply toughing out whatever damage comes its way. Some nematodes flood their cells with trehalose, a sugar that stabilizes proteins and membranes as water leaves, essentially stepping in to do water's job once water is gone. Trehalose replaces some of the physical support that water normally provides, keeping biological structures in their proper shape instead of letting them deform as they dry. As the inside of the cell keeps drying, protective molecules help push it into a glass-like state where molecular movement becomes dramatically restricted. This biological glass isn't hard or transparent like a window. It's a thick, viscous molecular arrangement that locks fragile components firmly into place. With movement restricted, damaging reactions slow to a crawl, structures stay safely separated, and the dried-out animal becomes far more stable than an ordinary desiccated organism ever could be. Life survives here because chemistry gets throttled down to almost nothing before it has the chance to destroy the very machinery needed for recovery. Rotifers run a related strategy, adding another group to this strange club of animals that dry into apparent lifelessness and later climb right back out of it. Many rotifers live in temporary pools and puddles where evaporation repeatedly wipes out the water their active bodies depend on. Instead of trying to escape every drought, they contract, lose most of their body water, stabilize their cells, and simply wait until moisture restores the conditions activity requires. To us, dried moss packed with cryptobiotic organisms looks like an empty, lifeless landscape. At microscopic scale, it functions more like a biological archive. Scattered through that material are animals whose active lives have been interrupted rather than ended, each one waiting for a signal as simple as returning water. This changes what habitat even means, because a place no longer has to stay continuously livable if the creatures inside it can simply stop participating during the bad stretches. A pond can vanish, moss can turn brittle, soil can bake under the sun, and the organisms inside can just retreat from metabolism entirely until conditions turn usable again. For an active animal, survival usually means holding internal stability steady while the outside world keeps shifting, using behavior and metabolism to push back against heat, cold, hunger, or thirst. Cryptobiotic animals abandon that fight altogether, giving up active stability and preserving only the underlying structure that activity can later be rebuilt from. That's what separates cryptobiosis from ordinary sleep. A sleeping animal still breathes, still burns energy, still regulates its temperature, and still runs almost every essential cellular process in the background. Hibernation pushes further, dropping body temperature and metabolism hard, yet a hibernating mammal is still an actively regulated system continuously burning through stored energy. Cryptobiosis blows straight past both of those states, dropping metabolism so low that instruments genuinely struggle to tell biological activity apart from complete inactivity. The animal survives by temporarily removing most of the processes that would otherwise need sustaining, rather than by finding some more efficient way to sustain them. This creates a strange relationship with time, because biological aging depends far more on chemical activity than on the simple movement of a calendar. A dormant animal still experiences physical time passing, but the reactions behind metabolism, growth, and accumulated molecular damage proceed at radically reduced rates. From the animal's own internal perspective, a long, dry stretch stops feeling like years of grinding survival and starts feeling like a single, enormous gap between two moments of activity. Rain falls, the body rehydrates, membranes snap back into working order, enzymes resume their jobs, and a life interrupted by drought just continues on into a changed world. The moss around it has aged, the seasons have turned over, predators have come and gone, and whole generations of larger creatures have lived out normal lives, while this tiny animal stayed almost chemically silent the entire time. This ability gets even stranger when cryptobiosis begins before birth, which is exactly what happens in several small animals built for unpredictable environments. Brine shrimp produce tough embryos sealed inside protective cysts that stay dormant whenever water, oxygen, temperature, or salinity refuses to cooperate with normal development. The embryo inside never has to guess when conditions will improve, because dormancy lets environmental time pass by entirely without forcing development through a hostile stretch. Once favorable conditions return, metabolism accelerates, development picks back up, and the organism continues on from a stage that was carefully preserved rather than restarted from zero. This is a big reason cryptobiosis works so well in unstable habitats. It turns environmental unpredictability from a direct threat into nothing more than a waiting problem. A creature that has to stay active needs food, water, oxygen, and tolerable temperatures constantly. A cryptobiotic creature only really needs those things during the stretches when it chooses to be active. That advantage becomes enormous in any habitat that keeps swinging back and forth between abundance and outright catastrophe. Rather than evolve enough machinery to function through the worst possible conditions, an organism can instead evolve machinery that simply preserves itself until those conditions pass. That same strategy reshapes dispersal too, letting a dormant organism survive journeys that an active animal could never make it through. Dry soil rides the wind, fragments of moss travel stuck to passing animals, sediment shifts through waterways, and dormant microscopic creatures travel inside all of it without eating a single meal along the way. Once they land somewhere wet enough for activity, the pause simply ends, and the animal wakes up in an environment it never actually crossed on its own. Cryptobiosis ends up working as both a survival mechanism and a transportation system, letting tiny organisms occupy habitats separated by huge stretches of completely unsuitable space. Small size sharpens this advantage further, since microscopic bodies need very little material to preserve and can hide inside dust, pores, vegetation, and thin films of moisture invisible at human scale. Size alone doesn't explain the trick, though. An ordinary microscopic animal still dies the moment its water disappears, same as any other creature. The real innovation is biochemical control over the transition itself, especially the genuinely dangerous window when cellular water levels are changing fast in either direction. Entering cryptobiosis badly kills the organism just as surely as ordinary dehydration would, so survival depends on preparing membranes, proteins, DNA, and cellular architecture in exactly the right order. Coming back out carries its own risk, because rehydration suddenly restores molecular movement everywhere at once, and that rush can damage structures that survived the entire dry period just fine. A cryptobiotic organism survives 2 separate emergencies every single time it uses this trick, shutting life down safely and starting it back up again without losing cellular order along the way. The second half gets far less attention because revival looks effortless from the outside, but restoring a working cell means getting thousands of coordinated molecular systems to restart together all at once. Membranes have to regain their flexibility, proteins have to fold back into working shapes, damaged molecules need repairing, and metabolism has to climb back up without triggering a destructive burst of chemical stress. The whole animal then has to reconnect all of that into coordinated movement, digestion, sensation, reproduction, and behavior. That restart is what pushes cryptobiosis past simple preservation. Preserved material just stays intact and nothing more. A cryptobiotic organism restores the full coordinated activity of a living creature. That distinction matters when scientists ask one of biology's hardest questions. What is the minimum amount of activity something actually needs to still count as alive? A running animal answers that question easily. It moves, it responds, it burns energy, and it constantly exchanges matter with everything around it. A dried tardigrade or nematode strips away nearly every one of those obvious signs while still holding onto the organized physical state those signs would normally come from. Life can't be defined only by what an organism happens to be doing in a single moment, because cryptobiosis keeps biological potential fully intact through extreme stretches of total inactivity. The animal stays part of a genuinely living system, even while most of the processes we normally use to spot that system have gone completely quiet. Pausing a machine like that should be impossible, because biological machines usually depend on a constant flow of energy just to hold their own shape together. Proteins unfold, membranes leak, DNA takes damage, and molecules drift into destructive reactions unless the cell keeps spending energy every second just to maintain order. Cryptobiotic organisms sidestep this by trading active maintenance for passive stability, turning the cell into a state that barely needs any upkeep at all. Their bodies go chemically quiet enough that fragile structures stay perfectly preserved without any constant flow of energy propping them up. This has pulled in enormous scientific attention because the exact same problem shows up whenever humans try to preserve living cells, tissue, or medicine for long stretches of time. Modern medicine leans heavily on refrigeration and freezing, since biological molecules simply hold together better once chemical reactions slow down. Cryptobiotic animals point toward a completely different route: stabilize structures so thoroughly that extreme drops in activity become survivable instead of destructive. Understanding these mechanisms hands researchers real molecular tools for preserving sensitive biological material outside the narrow conditions life normally demands. The lesson stretches far beyond preservation, because extreme survival often comes down to avoiding a fight entirely rather than winning one. A tardigrade doesn't outlast drought by working harder without water. It simply stops needing the functions water was supporting in the first place. A nematode doesn't survive years of dryness through constant repair. It cuts the molecular activity that was creating most of the need for repair to begin with. Their resilience comes down to knowing, at a purely biochemical level, exactly when staying active has become the more dangerous choice. That's the exact opposite of how we survive. Movement, metabolism, circulation, and fast reactions are our main line of defense against a constantly changing world. Strip those systems out of a mammal, and life ends within minutes, while cryptobiotic organisms evolved an entirely separate operating mode built specifically around their own temporary absence. That second mode has nothing to do with turning tardigrades into dominant animals. Cryptobiosis is built for surviving inactivity, not for performing during activity. A ton can't chase food, escape a predator, reproduce, or defend territory. Its remarkable durability exists precisely because almost everything else has switched off. Evolution traded raw capability for sheer persistence here, building organisms willing to give up control of the present in exchange for a real shot at the future. That trade really pays off at microscopic scale, where a small animal can simply wait out a drying habitat until whatever defeated the larger, active creatures around it finally disappears. The organism never really beats the hostile environment in any normal sense, because during cryptobiosis, it barely takes part in that environment at all. Heat, drought, cold, and time keep acting on the world outside, while the animal sits inside a protected molecular state built specifically to outlast all of it. Eventually, the environment turns again, since even brutal conditions are temporary in most habitats, where rain, seasonal moisture, or melting ice keeps restoring liquid water sooner or later. Then the exact same creature that looked indistinguishable from debris starts reversing its transformation, one molecule and one tissue at a time. A contracted body expands, legs and muscles come back online, fluid starts moving through microscopic spaces again, and chemistry turns straight back into behavior. Nothing supernatural is happening in any of this, yet the moment still feels unsettling, because it crosses a line we instinctively treat as permanent. Sleep still makes sense to us because activity keeps humming along quietly underneath it. Death makes sense too, because damaged biological order never comes back online. Cryptobiosis sits in the narrow, uncomfortable gap between those two familiar states, holding on to the organization of life while letting almost all of its visible activity disappear. The animal isn't dead, but for a while it survives by looking more like death than almost any active creature ever manages to. That trick has been quietly running for hundreds of millions of microscopic lifetimes, playing out in soil, moss, temporary pools, and other completely ordinary places all around us right now. Every dry patch of vegetation hides the same possibility. Somewhere inside it, an animal has reduced itself to a stable little package and simply stepped outside the present moment. It has no idea rain is coming, no plan for how long the drought will last, and no need to count a single one of the passing days. Its survival rests entirely on molecular preparation finished long before activity ever stopped, holding just enough order in place for the whole system to restart the instant water finally shows up. The most extraordinary part of cryptobiosis has nothing to do with the punishment these animals absorb. It's about how completely they rewrite the rules that make that punishment matter at all. Most living things survive by fighting every single second just to stay alive, burning energy non-stop to keep fragile chemistry locked inside a painfully narrow range. Tardigrades, nematodes, rotifers, and the rest found a different answer entirely. When the world turns impossible, stop trying to live in it the normal way. They dry out, contract, stabilize, and wait while the world keeps moving on without them, holding the physical possibility of life folded inside bodies that look almost exactly like lifeless matter. Then water finds the moss, the soil, or the pool again, and a story that looked completely finished simply picks right back up from the sentence where it stopped.